What would you do if the person who looked through you like glass turned out to be the one holding your entire future in their hands? Let's find out. And if you're new here, welcome to Birthright Tales. Hit that subscribe button and stay until the end. This one is worth it. Harrington Obuobi had been working in Canadian finance long enough to know exactly what a room felt like when it decided you didn't belong in it. He'd felt it at 23, fresh out of Dalhousie, with a finance degree and a firm handshake, walking into his first Bay Street interview while the receptionist asked him twice if he was there for the mailroom position. He'd felt it at 31 when his regional manager introduced him to a client as our diversity hire, with a smile, as if that explained everything. He'd felt it so many times over the years that he'd developed a kind of internal calibration for it, like a barometer reading pressure changes before the storm. The morning he walked into the lobby of Caldecott Merit Capital in downtown Calgary, the barometer spiked. He wasn't there for a job interview. He wasn't there to pitch anything. He wasn't carrying a portfolio or a business card holder or any of the props people associate with someone trying to make an impression. He was wearing a dark gray wool coat, nothing flashy, nothing cheap, and he was carrying a single manila folder tucked under his arm. That was it. The lobby was the kind that announces money before you've said a word. 16-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors, a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of pale oak. There were 3 people working behind it. None of them looked up when he walked in. He waited. A woman in her late 20s, name tag read Stephanie, eventually made eye contact. Not a smile, just the look. The one that starts at your shoes and travels up slowly, reassessing, recalculating. "Can I help you?" The words were polite. The tone was a different conversation entirely. "I have at 10 o'clock, Harrington said, with the executive team." Stephanie looked at her screen, looked at him, looked at her screen again. "Your name?" "Harrington Obuobi." A pause. The kind that isn't really a pause, it's a recalibration, because the name matched something on the screen that clearly didn't match the picture she'd assembled in her head. "And you're here for the board meeting," he said. "Suite 1800. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, hung up. "Someone will be right down," she said, and turned back to her monitor. He stood there. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't shift his weight or fidget. He had learned a long time ago that stillness was its own kind of power, and he had earned every inch of it. The elevator doors opened, and a man in his early 50s came toward him with the energetic confidence of someone who had been the smartest person in every room he'd ever entered, and had never once been told otherwise. This was Fletcher Drummond, CEO of Caldecott Merit Capital for the past 19 years. The kind of man whose name appeared in the Financial Post 3 or 4 times a year, built like someone who used to play rugby and never quite let go of the identity. Silver hair, expensive watch, the particular tan of a man who skis in February. He stopped about 6 feet away from Harrington. Not close enough to shake hands, just close enough to assess. "Mr. Obuobi." Not a question, just the name, held up like an object to examine. "Mr. Drummond," Harrington said. Fletcher's eyes did the same thing Stephanie's had done. The shoes, the coat, the folder, and landed on Harrington's face with an expression that was not quite a frown and not quite a smile. Something in between. The look of a man solving a problem he hadn't expected to have. "I have to be honest with you," Fletcher said, lowering his voice slightly, which in a marble lobby accomplished nothing except making him feel more discreet. "When Whitmore's office said we'd be having a guest join us for the review, I had a certain picture in mind." Harrington said nothing. "You understand," Fletcher continued. "The fund you represent, the numbers are significant. You assumed someone else would be walking through that door," Harrington said, not unkindly, plainly. Fletcher smiled. The smile of a man who had been caught and had decided the best response was charm. "I'm just saying, we'll want to make sure everything is properly verified before we proceed to the boardroom. Routine due diligence." "You understand." "Of course," Harrington said. And he meant it, because he had been here before, many times. And he had learned that the moment always came. The moment where the room showed you exactly who it was. And that the only thing you could do was let it. They put him in a small meeting room on the 14th floor while they verified credentials. This was not where the executive meeting was being held. That was on the 18th floor, where Harrington could see through the glass panels as he was escorted past. A long table, a dozen chairs, water pitchers, printed agendas already set out. The 14th floor room had a round table that seated four, a whiteboard that someone had forgotten to erase, and a window with a view of the parking garage. A junior associate named Brendan was assigned to sit with him. Brendan was maybe 26, clearly uncomfortable, and kept apologizing for the wait in a way that made the wait worse. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "We have." "I'm fine," Harrington said. "The team is just—" "Brendan," Harrington looked at him. "It's all right. Sit down." Brendan sat down. Harrington opened his manila folder and reviewed the documents inside, not because he needed to. He had read them so many times he could recite them, but because it gave Brendan permission to stop hovering. While he sat there, he thought about his father. His father, Kofi Obuobi, had come to Canada from Ghana in 1979 with a mathematics degree and exactly 400 Canadian dollars. He had worked for 12 years as a bookkeeper for a plumbing supply company in Brampton while taking night courses. He had never complained about the work. He had never explained himself to anyone who didn't ask. And on the morning Harrington left for his first day at Dalhousie, his father had said something to him that he had never forgotten. "You will spend your life proving things to people who have already decided. Prove them anyway. Not for them. For everyone who comes after you." Harrington had written that down. It was still in his wallet. At 47 minutes after his scheduled meeting time, the door opened and a woman walked in. This was Lorraine Ashby, the firm's chief legal officer. Late 40s, precise posture, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She sat down across from Harrington without ceremony and set a tablet on the table. "Mr. Obuobi, I apologize for the delay." "Not a problem. I've been reviewing the documentation your office sent over." She looked at her tablet. "The Obuobi family trust currently holds." She paused, and in that pause was the same recalibration he'd seen in the lobby. $412 million in managed assets. 417, he said, as of last Thursday. Lorraine looked up. "The quarterly re-evaluation came in early," he said. She held his gaze for a moment, then she closed the cover of her tablet. "Mr. Drummond wasn't informed of the scope of your involvement here." "No," Harrington agreed. "He wasn't. He let that sit for a moment. Because there was a reason for that, and the reason was relevant." 6 weeks earlier, Douglas Whitmore, the founding partner of Caldecott Merritt, and the man who had recruited the Obuobi family trust as a client, had suffered a minor stroke. He was recovering well, but he had stepped back from active management of the firm's largest relationships. He had, before stepping back, made one very specific request: that Harrington be present at the annual portfolio review in his place, not as a courtesy, as a principle. Fletcher Drummond had been sent a briefing. Harrington's office had confirmed it was received. He had simply not read it carefully enough to understand what it meant. This was the thing about assumptions. They were efficient. They saved time. They allowed you to move through the world at speed. But they also had a way of constructing walls in places where doors had been installed. "I think," Lorraine said carefully, "it would be appropriate to move upstairs now." "I think so too," Harrington said. The 18th floor boardroom had been in session for 40 minutes by the time Harrington walked in. There were 11 people at the table. Most of them looked up when the door opened. A few of them registered surprise, but discreetly, the professional kind, the kind that gets tucked away and processed later. Fletcher Drummond, seated at the head of the table, did not have the professional kind. His expression, and Harrington had to give him some credit, he recovered quickly, moved through 3 distinct phases in about 2 seconds. The first was confusion. The second was something darker and less flattering. The third was a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "Mr. Obuobi," he said. "Welcome." "Thank you," Harrington said, and took the empty chair that had been set at the far end of the table, directly across from Fletcher, as it happened. Lorraine Ashby remained standing near the door. She addressed the room. "For those who weren't fully briefed," she said, and there was something careful in her emphasis. Mr. Harrington Obuobi is here as the principal representative of the Obuobi Family Trust, which, as of this quarter, represents the firm's largest single-managed account. The room was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a meeting, pausing to absorb new information. The specific quiet of a room that was doing rapid, private arithmetic. Fletcher said, "Of course," smoothly, professionally, like a man who had not spent the last 40 minutes assuming something very different. "We're glad to have you here." Harrington nodded, opened his folder, set it on the table. "Should we get started?" he said. Now here is where you might expect the story to turn into something triumphant and simple. Where Harrington dresses down Fletcher Drummond in front of the board. Where the man squirms and apologizes, and the room breaks into some kind of silent applause. That's not what happened. Because Harrington Obuobi was not interested in that. He had not come to Calgary to make a point. He had come to do what Douglas Whitmore had asked him to do. To review the trust portfolio, to assess the firm's performance, and to make a decision about the future of a relationship that represented, for Caldecott Merit, a significant portion of their operating revenue. That was the meeting. So that was what they had. For the next 3 hours, Harrington went through the portfolio line by line. He asked precise questions. He listened carefully to answers. He pushed back when the numbers didn't add up to the narrative, and gave credit when the team had genuinely performed well. Everyone in that room understood within the first 20 minutes. Not a figurehead. Not a name on a trust document. He was the person who understood the fund better than anyone else in that room. Fletcher, to his credit, adapted. Professionals usually do. By the second hour, he was engaging with Harrington's questions directly. And if there was something stiff in it, something overcompensating, well, that was his business to manage. The meeting ended at 2 in the afternoon. As the room cleared, Fletcher approached Harrington near the door. The charm was back, but it was a different kind now. Less easy, more deliberate. "I want to," he started. "Fletcher," Harrington said it in the same tone he'd use for anyone. Neutral. Direct. "I received the briefing documents you were sent before today." Fletcher stopped. "I know you received them too," Harrington said. "I'm not interested in the explanation for this morning. What I am interested in is whether or not this firm has the management capacity to serve this portfolio at the level it deserves. I'm going to take the next 2 weeks to review everything we went through today, and I'll have a recommendation for the Trust's Board of Directors by the end of the month." Fletcher nodded. Maybe an apology. Maybe an assurance. But Harrington was already picking up his folder. "Your team did good work on the Meridian restructure," Harrington said. "I want that noted. Tell them." And then he left. He took the elevator down alone, walked through the lobby, past Stephanie at the reception desk, who didn't look up, through the revolving door, out onto the cold Calgary street, where the November wind came in hard off the mountains, and the sky was the flat white of a day that couldn't decide whether to snow. He stood there for a moment. Not triumphant, not angry. Something quieter than either of those. He thought about his father again. About that morning at the door of the house in Brampton, with the old blue suitcase and the Dalhousie acceptance letter folded in his coat pocket. Not for them. For everyone who comes after you. 2 weeks later, the Obuobi Family Trust retained Caldecott Merit Capital as their primary fund manager. The decision came with conditions. A restructured management fee, a new reporting schedule, and the appointment of a dedicated relationship manager from the firm's senior staff who would report directly to Harrington's office. Fletcher Drummond signed the agreement himself. He never mentioned the morning in the lobby. There was one other thing that changed. A small thing, maybe. But Harrington noted it. 3 months after the board meeting, Caldecott Merit Capital posted 2 new positions in their associate program, a targeted outreach program for candidates from underrepresented communities. It wasn't announced with fanfare. It was listed quietly on their careers page, the way most real changes are made. Whether Fletcher Drummond drove that decision, or whether Lorraine Ashby did, or whether it came from somewhere else entirely, Harrington didn't know and didn't ask. He just saw it. And he thought about the people who would walk through that lobby someday, and what it might feel like to have the room already be a little bit different than the one he'd walked into. Some things you do for yourself. Some things you do because your father told you who was really watching. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the person in that lobby, or if you know someone who has, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed to Birthright Tales yet, now is a good time. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them matters. See you in the next one.